Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The shrill sound of the old farmhouse door rattling echoed through the quiet morning air. For a second, everything stood still. Then, with a force that rattled the walls, the barn doors flew open. A small figure, drenched, pale, and trembling, stumbled into the dusty sunlight. Samuel didn't know what to think. His heart hammered in his chest, confusion mixing with fear. The girl, no older than 10, couldn't speak, only point toward the horizon. Her eyes, wide and frantic, met his with a desperation that sent a cold shiver down his spine. The girl had come from the woods. But how? And why? Samuel's mind raced. He scanned the distant tree line. Nothing seemed unusual at first glance. Yet there was something unsettling about the stillness that gripped the land today. The wind had died. The animals were quiet. It was as though the whole world was holding its breath. "Who are you?" Samuel asked, his voice a mix of concern and disbelief. He wanted answers. But the girl only shook her head, her lips pressed tight together, as if speaking would shatter her fragile world. Then, as if on cue, the deep growl of an engine cut through the silence. His eyes snapped up, heart sinking in his chest. Military jeeps, at least 4, were rolling toward the farm, their tires kicking up dust, their engines a steady rumble. They were headed straight for his barn, straight for him. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what was happening, but he felt it in his bones. This was not a coincidence. The girl's hand clenched around his sleeve, her grip desperate. Her eyes flicked to the approaching vehicles, and for the first time her mouth parted. "Run," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, as if speaking louder would summon something worse. Before Samuel could respond, the door slammed shut behind them with a heavy thud. He spun around, feeling the weight of the moment press in from all sides. He didn't know what was happening, but it was too late to turn back now. And then, as he looked out the window, he saw it, a figure in the distance. Someone was standing on the hill overlooking the barn. It was a man wearing dark military gear, but the way he stood, motionless, watching, sent a chill down Samuel's spine. He couldn't see his face, but the figure didn't move, didn't blink. Samuel's hands trembled. There were too many questions, and too few answers. "Why are they here?" Samuel whispered to the girl, but she didn't respond. He turned his gaze back to the approaching jeeps. He could see the soldiers now, their faces stern, intent on something he couldn't understand. He didn't know what they wanted or why they were here, but one thing was clear: they were coming for him. The girl's hand, once clenched around his sleeve, loosened. She seemed to melt into the background, her body pressing into the cold wood of the barn. She wasn't even breathing, her chest barely moved. Samuel took a step back. He had seen enough fear in the eyes of people who had lived on this land all their lives to recognize it, but this was different. The girl wasn't just afraid, she was terrified. And whatever was about to happen, she knew more than she was letting on. Samuel didn't know what to do. He had no weapons, no means of defense, just the old rifle hanging above the mantel, which hadn't been fired in years. A handful of old shells in the cabinet. But even that felt useless now, and still the jeeps came closer. His mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Why was she here? And why were they after her? Was it possible she was somehow tied to whatever had been unfolding just beyond his quiet farm? It was the kind of mystery no one on this land ever expected to be part of. People here kept to themselves. They farmed, raised families, and never strayed too far from the beaten path. But something was different now. Why did they come for you? Samuel asked again, this time louder, trying to break the girl's silence. She shook her head again, a tiny motion, but enough to tell him that speaking wasn't an option. And then her eyes went wild as the first of the soldiers reached the barn. A loud voice bellowed from outside. "Where is she?" the soldier called, his voice cold and authoritative. Samuel flinched. He could feel the presence of the soldiers now, the tension so thick he could almost taste it. His mind was clouded with fear, and his body moved without him thinking. He instinctively backed away from the window, dragging the girl with him. She was still silent, still terrified, and still holding onto his arm as if she was afraid he might let her go. The barn felt smaller now, more like a trap. He could hear the sounds of boots crunching the dry dirt outside, the unmistakable sound of soldiers assembling. Samuel tried to catch his breath, his thoughts a blur. His pulse was racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't let them find her. He couldn't let them find him. Whatever had brought them here, whatever was tied to the girl, it wasn't safe. Then, from outside the barn, a voice shouted, "We have a search order. Don't make this harder." Samuel froze. Search order. What was going on? Was this some kind of raid? Were they looking for the girl because she had run away, or was there something far worse at play? The soldiers' tone was clear. They had come prepared, and they had orders. He could hear the sound of doors opening, soldiers spreading out around the barn, moving quickly and methodically. Samuel's mind raced. There was no time. He had to do something, anything. The girl's grip tightened, her fingers digging into his skin, her eyes pleading with him. She was trembling harder now, shaking as though the mere thought of them getting closer to her was too much to bear. "Don't let them take me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Samuel looked at her, confused. "What do you mean? Who are they?" She didn't respond. Instead, she tugged at his sleeve again, urging him to move, but where? He had no idea where to run. And then it hit him. He needed to get to the back of the barn, to the old cellar. It wasn't much, but it could hide them. It was their only option. "Come on," he muttered, pulling her toward the back. The floorboards creaked under their feet as they hurried, the tension building with each step. His heart was racing. He could hear the soldiers' voices now, getting closer. They were only moments away. The back door creaked open, and Samuel quickly guided the girl down the narrow wooden steps that led to the cellar below. He pushed the door shut. Behind them, just as he heard the first footstep on the porch above. His hands shook as he fumbled with the lock, trying to secure it as quietly as possible. It was dark down there, the air thick with the smell of old earth and forgotten memories. But it was their only refuge. "Why didn't you tell me?" Samuel asked as he knelt down, looking into the girl's eyes. "Why didn't you say anything?" She stared at him, her face pale and drawn, her eyes full of something Samuel couldn't quite understand. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something deeper. A warning. "They're not just looking for me," she said softly, her voice quivering. "They're looking for the truth." The words hit Samuel like a cold wave. The truth? What truth? And why was it so dangerous that they were willing to send soldiers for a little girl? He stared at her, lost for answers, and then, from above, he heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots, followed by a voice that chilled him to the core. "Clear the house!" a soldier shouted. "She's here somewhere." And Samuel knew, in that moment, that everything had just changed. The truth was far darker than he could have imagined, and the storm that had been brewing on his farm was just beginning. The dim light from the small cellar window barely illuminated the wooden walls, but it was enough to make the shadows dance across the floor. The air was musty, filled with the scent of soil and forgotten memories. Samuel could hear the muffled sounds of soldiers above, moving with purpose, their boots tapping against the wooden floorboards of the barn. Every sound they made echoed through the silence like a drumbeat in his chest. The girl, no, she wasn't just a child anymore, stood with her back pressed against the cold stone wall. Her small hands were trembling, her fingers clenched tightly, into fists as though bracing herself for something far worse. Samuel felt a knot in his stomach, and it had nothing to do with the fear of the soldiers outside. Something about the girl's demeanor, the way she held herself, made it clear. This wasn't an ordinary child. She knew far more than she was letting on. She knew what was coming, and that thought terrified him more than the soldiers did. "What truth?" Samuel asked again, his voice barely more than a whisper. "What's going on here?" She didn't respond right away. Instead, she dropped her gaze, as if struggling to find the words. Samuel wanted to reach out, to pull her close and shield her from whatever darkness had brought her here, but something held him back. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him from all sides. This wasn't just a little girl who had stumbled into his barn. No, there was something far larger at play here, something that was bigger than him, bigger than his farm. "They're not just looking for me," she finally said, her voice shaking. "They're looking for what's inside me. I'm the key to the thing they've been searching for." Samuel didn't understand. His mind struggled to process her words. The key? What could a little girl like her have to do with something so dangerous? "The key to what?" Samuel asked, almost desperate for some kind of clarity. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the small window high on the wall, as though she expected someone to appear at any moment. A tremor ran through her, and Samuel could see the fear in her eyes. It was the kind of fear that could break a person, and he could feel his heart breaking for her. "I don't know everything," she whispered, "but I know enough. They've been watching me for months. They know I'm here, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Samuel didn't know what to say. He wanted to reassure her, tell her that they'd be okay. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. They weren't safe, not as long as those soldiers were out there. The sounds of the soldiers above were getting louder. They were searching now, moving through the barn with precision. The heavy thuds of boots against the floor grew closer, and Samuel's heart raced faster. Time was running out. The girl's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and urgent. "They're coming," she said. "You have to hide me. You have to protect me." "I will," Samuel said, his voice firm. He had no plan, no idea how he was going to get them out of this. But something inside him snapped. He couldn't let them take her, not after everything she'd said. Whatever it was dangerous, and he had no intention of letting these soldiers get their hands on it. He stood up, his mind racing for options. There was a trapdoor near the back of the cellar, hidden beneath the dust and debris that had accumulated over the years. It led to a network of underground tunnels he'd forgotten about, tunnels that his grandfather had once used to hide from the government during a time of unrest. Samuel had never needed to use them. He'd forgotten they existed, until now. He looked at the girl. She was staring at him with wide eyes, waiting for him to make the next move. "Can you walk?" Samuel asked, his voice low. She nodded quickly, her gaze darting to the stairs above. Her lips were trembling, but she said nothing. Samuel could see the weight of her fear, but it was mixed with something else, determination. She wasn't going to break. She'd come this far, and she wasn't going to let anyone take her now. Samuel moved swiftly to the back of the cellar, brushing aside the cobwebs and dust that had gathered over the years. The trapdoor was hidden beneath a stack of crates, but it didn't take much to move them. His hands were shaking as he pulled open the old wooden door, revealing the steep steps leading down into darkness. He turned back to the girl. "Stay close to me. Don't make a sound." She nodded again, her eyes never leaving him as she stepped closer, her tiny hand clutching his sleeve tightly. Together, they descended into the darkness, the trapdoor creaking closed behind them with a quiet thud. Samuel could feel the chill of the underground air as they moved deeper into the tunnel. The only sound was their footsteps echoing off the stone walls, the occasional drip of water from somewhere far off in the distance. The tunnel stretched far longer than he remembered, winding through the earth like a maze. He had no idea where it led, but it had to be far from the barn. The soldiers wouldn't think to look here. They'd be expecting an escape out the back of the barn, or worse, down the road. But this tunnel, no one knew about it anymore. No one except for him. And now, the girl. As they moved further down the tunnel, Samuel could feel the weight of the situation settling in. He was in over his head, he knew that. This wasn't just about protecting a child anymore. This was about something much bigger, something dangerous enough to send armed soldiers to his doorstep. He had no idea what they were after, but he had a sinking feeling that whatever it was, it would change everything. The girl's breathing had slowed, but she was still holding on to him, her grip unyielding. She was frightened, but she was strong, stronger than most adults, Samuel knew. He had no idea how she'd survived, how she'd managed to get this far. But he knew one thing. She wasn't just a victim, she was a survivor. "How much further?" she whispered. "Not much," Samuel replied, his voice barely more than a breath. He could see the end of the tunnel now, a faint sliver of light breaking through the darkness. As they approached the end of the tunnel, the girl pulled on his sleeve again. "Samuel, you don't understand. They'll never stop. They won't stop until they have me." "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice a whisper in the dim light. "They're not just after me," she said, her voice barely audible. "They're after what's inside me, the thing that's been with me since I was born." Samuel froze. His heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" The girl turned to face him, her eyes wide and filled with something he couldn't name, something ancient, something powerful. "I'm not just a child. I'm the one who holds the truth, the secret they've been looking for, the key to everything." Samuel didn't understand. He wanted to ask her what she meant, but before he could say anything, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy boots, echoing down the tunnel behind them. "They found us," the girl whispered, her voice filled with terror. Samuel's blood ran cold. They weren't safe. The footsteps were getting closer. Samuel could feel the heat of panic rising in his chest. He had no idea how the soldiers had found the tunnel, but they had. They were coming fast. They wouldn't be long before they caught up with him and the girl. There was nowhere to run. He glanced at the girl, her wide, terrified eyes meeting his. For a brief moment, she was just a child again. The vulnerable, frightened girl who had stumbled into his barn, drenched and desperate. But in the next instant, the weight of her words returned to him, the key to everything. What did she mean? What truth could she hold inside her that was so powerful it had brought these soldiers all the way to his quiet farm? And why did it seem like they would stop at nothing to get to her? The tunnel was narrow, winding like a labyrinth beneath the earth. The faint light at the end of the tunnel grew larger, but Samuel knew they couldn't make it there in time. He could hear the soldiers' boots pounding closer. They were too fast, too relentless. He pulled the girl closer, trying to keep her calm. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "We have to keep moving. We can't stop now." The girl nodded, her eyes darting around as if searching for a way out, but there was no escape. Not here. Not now. As they continued down the tunnel, the footsteps grew louder. Samuel's heart raced, the sound of his own breathing mixing with the noise from behind them. He tried to push the panic down, but it was hard. They couldn't outrun them. They couldn't hide forever. Whatever these soldiers wanted, they were determined to get it, and the girl knew more than she was saying. That much was clear. The light at the end of the tunnel flickered as they drew closer, casting long shadows along the stone walls. Samuel could feel the cool air from the outside, the promise of freedom just beyond the reach of his fingertips. But it was too far, too distant. "We have to get out of here," he muttered, more to himself than to the girl. But she wasn't listening. Her eyes were focused on something else, something behind them. Samuel turned, and his heart stopped. Figure stood at the entrance of the tunnel, blocking the way out. It was a soldier dressed in dark military gear. His face was obscured by a helmet, but Samuel could see the unmistakable bulk of a rifle slung across his chest. The soldier didn't move, didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring down at them. "Stay back!" Samuel shouted, his voice shaking with the surge of adrenaline that rushed through him. "Stay away from her." The soldier didn't respond. He just stood there, his eyes locked on the girl. Samuel's mind raced. Was this it? Was this where it all ended? Was this what they'd been running from? The girl stepped forward, her hand gripping Samuel's sleeve tightly. "Don't," she whispered. "He's not here for me." Samuel blinked. What did she mean? The soldier was clearly here to take her, to bring her back to whatever nightmare had been following her. But before he could ask, the soldier lifted his hand and slowly removed his helmet. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. The face beneath the helmet wasn't what he expected. It was a man, maybe in his mid-30s, with dark, intense eyes and a grim expression. But it wasn't the man's appearance that shocked Samuel. It was the recognition in the back of his mind. He knew this man. "I didn't expect to find you here, Samuel," the man said, his voice calm, almost casual. There was no malice in his tone, but there was a hardness to it, a coldness that sent chills down Samuel's spine. "You—" Samuel's voice faltered. You're not supposed to be here." The man's lips twitched, just the slightest hint of a smile. "I should say the same to you." Samuel took a step back, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't a random soldier, this wasn't just some faceless enemy. This was someone he knew, someone from his past. You're one of them," Samuel said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "You were with them." The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced down at the girl, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before he spoke again. "She's the one, isn't she?" he asked, his voice low, almost too soft. "The key." Samuel's stomach dropped. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The girl wasn't just a frightened child caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. She was the key, the thing these soldiers had been looking for, the thing they would kill to obtain. "What do you want with her?" Samuel demanded, his voice breaking with anger and fear. "Why are you here? What have you done to her?" The man's eyes met Samuel's, and for a split second there was a flicker of something that almost looked like regret. But it was gone before Samuel could fully register it. "She's not just a child," the man said, his voice taking on a darker tone. "She's a piece of something much larger, something that could change everything." Samuel's mind reeled. He didn't understand. What did he mean? What could this girl possibly have to do with something that could change everything? The soldier took a step forward, and for a moment Samuel thought he might attack, but the man simply turned, his eyes flicking back to the girl. "She has no idea, does she?" he said, more to himself than to Samuel. "She doesn't know the power she holds." The girl's eyes were wide, her hands shaking. Samuel wanted to protect her, wanted to tell her it was all going to be okay. But deep down he knew it wasn't. They were trapped. The soldiers were here. There was no escaping this, no hiding from what was coming. "I won't let you take her," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "You won't take her." The soldier's eyes flicked back to him, his gaze piercing. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cold. "This isn't about what I want. This is about what she has, what she's capable of. You're in way over your head." Before Samuel could respond, the man raised his hand and signaled to the soldiers who had been following them. They stepped forward, moving quickly and efficiently, surrounding the two of them. "Get her," the soldier ordered. The girl's eyes widened in fear, and Samuel felt his heart lurch. They were too close, too many of them, but then something shifted. The girl stepped forward, her voice calm now, stronger than before. "No," she said firmly, her eyes locking with the soldier's. "You're not taking me." The soldier hesitated. For a moment, there was silence. Samuel could feel the tension in the air, thick and electric. The girl stood her ground, her gaze unwavering, and then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. With a sudden, powerful movement, the girl raised her hand, her fingers flicking in the air. The ground beneath their feet trembled. The soldiers staggered back, eyes wide in shock as the tunnel seemed to come alive, vibrating with a force Samuel couldn't comprehend. The soldier in front of them took a step back, his expression shifting from determination to disbelief. He raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the ground beneath his feet cracked, and he was thrown to the floor, as if some unseen force had thrown him down. Samuel stared in disbelief. What was happening? What was she doing? The girl turned to him, her face pale but determined. "They don't understand," she said softly. "But I do. I know what I am." Samuel had no words. He had no idea what this girl was capable of, or what she had just done. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something much bigger, something that had been hidden for years, something powerful enough to shake the very foundations of the world, and it was inside her. The earth beneath them rumbled again, this time stronger, shaking the very walls of the tunnel. The air grew thick, the atmosphere charged with something Samuel couldn't understand, something ancient and raw, like an untapped well of power that had just been set free. He glanced at the girl, her small frame standing tall, her hand raised in front of her, as if she were commanding the very forces of nature itself. The soldiers around them staggered back, fear flashing across their faces. Even the man who had once been a part of their group, a face Samuel had known from years ago, looked shaken. "I warned you," the girl said, her voice calm. But the underlying power in it sent a shiver down Samuel's spine. "You never understood what I could do." The man, whose name Samuel couldn't remember, took a cautious step forward. "You're not supposed to have this power," he said, his voice betraying his disbelief. "You're just a child." But the girl wasn't just a child anymore. She had become something else. Something the soldiers were not prepared for. Samuel didn't know what to say. His mind was still reeling. The girl, the secret she carried inside her, everything was coming into focus now, but it only made him more terrified. She wasn't just some innocent child caught in the middle of a military operation. She was a weapon, a force of nature, and he had no idea how he was supposed to protect her. The ground rumbled again, and this time it felt different. It wasn't just a tremor. It was as if the very earth itself had awakened. The soldiers, once so sure of themselves, were beginning to retreat, their eyes wide with panic. They had come prepared to capture the girl, to take her back, but now they were realizing they weren't dealing with a mere runaway child. They were facing something far more dangerous. The girl's eyes flicked to Samuel, her gaze hard, yet filled with something he couldn't name, something that wasn't fear, but resolve. "You don't have to protect me anymore," she said, her voice steady. "I can protect myself." "Protect yourself," Samuel repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You're just a little girl. You don't understand." "I understand more than you think," she cut him off, her voice sharper now. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everything. Everything they've been hiding." The soldier in front of them, the one who had spoken earlier, seemed to come to his senses. He raised his rifle, his fingers trembling on the trigger. "Get back!" he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. But the girl didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her hand still raised, and Samuel watched in awe as the earth beneath the soldier began to crack. Slowly at first, like a tiny fault line opening up, but it quickly spread. The soldier's eyes widened in terror as he stumbled backward, but it was too late. The ground shifted beneath him, and he fell, unable to stop his descent. The other soldiers looked on in horror, unsure of what to do. Some raised their rifles, but none dared to fire. The girl's power was something they couldn't comprehend, something that made their weapons feel useless. "You don't get it," the girl said, her eyes locked on the soldiers. "This isn't just power. This is a message. You can't control me. You never could." Samuel watched, his heart racing, as the girl's power continued to ripple through the ground. The tunnel walls shook, and cracks appeared in the stone, spreading like veins through the earth. The soldiers were backing away now, their faces pale with fear. The man who had once been part of their operation, the man Samuel had once known, looked like he was about to collapse under the weight of the girl's power. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "You're going to kill us all!" But the girl didn't respond. She didn't need to. She was in control now. Samuel felt something stir deep within him. The fear, the confusion. It was all still there, but something else was rising too. He couldn't help it. The realization that they were on the edge of something huge, something bigger than any of them could understand, filled him with awe. This girl, this child, had been running from something, from these men, from the world that didn't understand her. But now, for the first time, she wasn't running anymore. She was standing her ground. The soldier who had spoken before, Samuel remembered now that his name was Captain Matthews, took another step back, his face a mask of disbelief. "You think you can control this?" he spat, his voice shaking with anger. "You think you can just destroy everything?" "No," the girl said, her voice steady, her gaze unyielding. "I don't want to destroy anything. But you've given me no choice." The air around them seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, as though the very fabric of reality was being stretched to its limit. The power that the girl had unlocked wasn't just from the earth. It was something older, something primal. It was in the blood, in the bones of the land itself, and it was something that Samuel realized he had been blind to all along. The girl's eyes softened for just a moment, and for the briefest of seconds she seemed like the child Samuel had first met, a frightened, lost little girl. But then the moment passed, and her eyes hardened once again. "You've come for me," she said, her voice low, almost too soft to hear. "But what you don't realize is that I'm not just a piece of the puzzle. I'm the key to it all." Samuel felt his heart skip a beat. The key to it all. What did she mean? What was she talking about? But before he could ask, there was a sudden shift in the air. The ground beneath them groaned, the vibrations intensifying. The cracks in the tunnel walls widened, and Samuel stumbled, nearly losing his balance. The soldiers were backing away, now their rifles lowered, their faces a mixture of fear and disbelief. Captain Matthews was still standing, but his posture had changed. He wasn't in control anymore. The girl had taken that from him, just as she had taken everything else. "You think you can just change the world?" Matthews asked, his voice hoarse. "You think you can control what's been hidden for centuries?" The girl didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just stared at him, her gaze unwavering. And in that moment, Samuel understood. This wasn't just about power. This wasn't just about a secret. This was about something far older, something buried deep within the earth, within the land, within the blood of the people who had lived and died here. The girl wasn't just a child. She wasn't just a weapon. She was the inheritor of something ancient, something that had been hidden for centuries. "I don't want to change the world," she said finally, her voice softer now, almost sorrowful. "I just want to survive." And in that moment, everything came into focus for Samuel. He understood now. He understood why the soldiers were after her, why they had pursued her across the land, through the forest, across the fields. They weren't just after a girl. They were after something bigger, something they couldn't control. The girl wasn't just the key to their world. She was the key to something else entirely, and that something was about to be unleashed. Captain Matthews took one last step back, his face filled with something like regret. "You think you can outrun this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think you can control it?" The girl nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "I don't need to outrun it," she said softly. "I just need to survive." And then, with a sudden, earth-shattering crack, the tunnel collapsed around them. The soldiers screamed as the walls of the tunnel caved in, burying them under tons of stone and earth. Samuel could feel the force of the explosion, the air rushing past him as he was thrown backward. The ground trembled beneath them, and the world seemed to tear itself apart, and then, in the chaos, there was silence. The dust settled, and Samuel found himself lying on the cold, hard ground. His head was spinning, his body aching from the impact. But through it all, he heard her voice, the girl's voice, soft and steady. "We're not done yet," she said. Samuel opened his eyes, his vision blurred, but he could see her standing in the wreckage, her body unscathed. The power that had been unleashed was still there, still vibrating through the air. And then, as the dust cleared, Samuel realized something. This wasn't just the end of the tunnel. This was the beginning.